All right, hello everybody. I'm Jason Widup, VP of Marketing here at Metadata, and for the next 30 minutes, I have the great honor to moderate this panel about a topic that's not only hot at Metadata, but seems to be talked about more now than maybe I've seen at any other point in my career, and that's category creation. But being a marketing ops leader like myself for most of my career, maybe I just really never saw it that much. I've never really been exposed to that side of marketing until more recently. But now, like at Metadata, we're squarely in the middle of this today, trying to create a category. And I've actually had the luxury to take a chapter from each of the folks that we have on the panel today and try and apply it to our own category creation efforts. And today, we get to share all their experience with you. So before we jump into the content today, it's going to be just a normal kind of moderated panel style. I'll be your moderator, and then everybody else will kind of chime in. We'll start with some intros. So Sydney, you want to get us started with an introduction and just maybe mention the company that you were at that you'll be referencing where you had a lot of category creation experience?
Sure. So I was formerly the CMO of SalesLoft, which led the category creation of the sales engagement category. I was also the CMO at Alfresco, so I might talk about that because we did category redesign there. And currently I am an executive in residence, fancy title, at Scale Ventures, helping our portfolios with marketing advisory services.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Nick, Mr. Nick Mehta, do you want to intro yourself?
Yeah, sure. Super excited to have this conversation. Thanks for having me here, Jason, and great to be here with Sydney and Mike as well. So I'm Nick Mehta. I'm the CEO of Gainsight. I've been running Gainsight about 10 years, if you can believe it. So I obviously started in high school, or maybe a little bit after that. And category creation, something near and dear to our heart for two reasons, really. Like we make technology that helps companies run customer success, scale like their product experience, lots of different things like that have been software categories, but also like we've had to help think about a new job category, which is the customer success profession, which today watching this panel in 2022 is like every company has it. But when we launched the company in 2013, we had to convince people not only they need our software, but they needed a whole new job. And we can talk more about that.
Awesome. Yep.
And what SaaS was. Yeah.
And what SaaS was. Exactly.
And
what software and what the internet was. And
what's cloud.
What computers were. Exactly.
Awesome. Nice. Well, thanks, Nick. Thanks for joining us. And Mr. Mike Volpe, you want to intro yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Mike Volpe. I've worked a ton in marketing and then even sales and as CEO of my last company. But I think the one we'll talk most about today is HubSpot, where I was the first CMO and part of the early founding team and was there for 8 years through all the growth and IPO. And we created this category called inbound marketing, which I'm sure we'll be talking a little bit more about later.
I think I might have heard of that somewhere. Yeah, I mean, this is seriously a powerhouse. I'm super excited to have all of you on this today. There's so many connections, even like with my own category creation efforts, Nick, we're using, we've used the same agency that you guys use, a little bit. And Nick, we take a lot of pages from your playbook, and Sydney, like just seeing the stuff at SalesLoft, and having you on the show before, and then like trying to take some of that advice and applying it. I've had all that luxury. And so it's exciting for everybody else to get some of that too. So cool. Let's jump in. So Nick, this first question is for you because you like to reference your mom in some of your content. So like, how would you define category creation to your mom?
Oh, I love this one. One thing I'll just say, hat tip, like category creation, you're constantly learning from others. And so at Gainsight, we learned so much from HubSpot and from Mike and all the efforts he had, and then learned from contemporaries like what Sydney and her former team at SalesLoft did. So the way I describe this to my mom is, okay, I'm not a doctor, and I realize you haven't fully accepted that your son's not a doctor, but as an alternate career, he jumped into software, and instead of selling software to solve an existing problem with the better technology, we decided to go after something different, which is a new type of problem with a new type of technology. And so most businesses, I think, historically were better mousetrap for the same problem. And this is kind of like a new mousetrap for a new problem. And what I would say in terms of how that fits into this, what we're going to talk about today is it requires you to not only then talk about your technology, but to talk much more about the why and like what's the bigger problem you're trying to solve and help educate the buyer.
Nice, nice. Mike, would you add anything to that one?
No, I love the whole, better mousetrap kind of metaphor. I think there's a lot of companies that you can build a gigantic, super successful company that is just a better way of, a better take on an existing product, solving an existing problem. But I think either if it's showing people there's a new problem that they hadn't thought about before, or an existing problem, like at HubSpot, the problem we were solving was lead generation and growing sales, which is an centuries-old problem.
Right.
But it was a completely new approach to how to solve that problem. So I think it can be either a problem you don't realize you have and you expose that for people, or it can be, well, this problem you've had for decades, we have a totally new way of approaching it. That's a new way of thinking about it. Yeah.
Nice. Sydney, would you change anything, add anything?
So you said to my mom, so I'm going to take that question literally.
Yep.
And so I'm going to relate it to shopping. So my mom and I have been shopping at Nordstrom's ever since its inception. And the way that I would describe it to her is, when you go into the store and they have all these different departments and they're organized for the kinds of styles of clothes that you like that might be fitting to my mom or to my daughter. And so they've organized everything into categories so we know where in the store to go shopping and where we want to spend our money. And maybe there's innovation that then creates, you've always shopped in point of view, but hey, now there's Topshop because, younger girls like to have this style of clothing. And so they create a new department within the store, but it helps organize all the designers, all the different styles. And so when you go to spend, where in the store to shop. And so the way that I correlate that to categories is, it's really hard when you have 7,000 marketing technology companies to pick from to decide what you want. So we created categories so I'm looking for something, or it's time for me to invest in an account-based technology or in a data service provider or in a web platform. And so that helps us make sense of, as we're budgeting, as we're planning into our roadmap into the future, what kind of technologies. And then once it's time, then we look at that category. Generally, you'll start with the leaders, which is always why you want to be the leader in the category, to then begin your assessment of what it is that you're going to buy.
Yeah, I love that, Sydney. That's kind of how I think about it too, is when I talk about it, it's kind of like, well, how there's 9,000 MarTech tools out there? Well, just imagine if we all were like trying to market, or if you were a buyer and you had to okay, I have this one problem. Let me go research 9,000 tools and see which one of these tools can solve my problem. That would be just a nightmare. And so it's also, a way of us helping our buyer, kind of what Nick said a little bit too, is categorizing things into the problems that they solve. So okay, this is MarTech. Great. There's 9,000 tools. All right. What are the other thousands of categories in there so I know where to focus my research? And so, so that was,
or if you're going into Nordstrom's to buy a suit or a pair of khaki pants, you don't have to worry. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So Sydney, this question's for you. What signs are there that a company should maybe look into creating a category, or even signs that they should not or don't need to create a category?
Yeah, like you said at the top, it's on top of everybody's mind. It must be in the founder's playbook, because I advise a lot of companies when I talk to them, they're like, we want to create a category. And I always start with, well, why? Because it's really hard. It's really, really hard to create a category. And so when you're going into it, is it unique? Do you have a unique point of view? Are there multiple players that can play in this category with you? Because categories aren't shaped with a number of one. Or maybe it's even easier to go and disrupt an existing category. When I was at Alfresco, we were in the enterprise content management category, and I kid you not, the woman from Gartner had been following the category for 27 years. 27. She was retiring at the end of the tenure. But, it was a category that we chose to disrupt because the invention of cloud and the different ways that people were thinking about how they were managing their content inside of their company. So we recast it as content services, which was the concept that our company had come up with, which placed us well as they think about continuing to evolve the category. So I'd always start with why, because it's hard.
Yeah.
Nick, I would echo that, Sydney. Whenever it's we did a talk on category creation years ago at SaaStr, my former CMO, Anthony, and I, and we started out, and our first tip on category creation was, do you really want to do it? And it's, frankly, many of the best businesses in the world are just better mousetraps. Like if I'm looking right now at the publicly traded SaaS companies, Salesforce in some ways created a category in terms of SaaS, but like in terms of the actual product, CRM and Salesforce automation was there, but with Siebel and other companies before it, right? ServiceNow, IT service management existed before ServiceNow. CrowdStrike, like endpoint security, existed before CrowdStrike. Workday, PeopleSoft existed before Workday. And you can go down in the list pretty far before you get to a category creator. So sorry to be the buzzkill here, but category creation to me is what you want to do when it's necessary. And Sydney, I think the way you said it's so good. Like a lot of times it's not category creation, it's category redefinition or category consolidation or repositioning or whatever. But in some rare cases, like if you're selling into a new job or whatever, you have to create something net new. And that's kind of, I would say you do it out of necessity versus like your strategic goal is to create a category.
Yeah, a lot of the choice isn't left up to you. It's that the timing of the world and the market and the customers needs to be right. And you can't just decide like, well, I prefer to use this strategy, so I'm going to, but it's like, it's the landscape kind of dictates the strategy to a certain degree.
Yeah, one of the things that we saw and there were several signs for us, but like one of the things that we saw, and again, I've never done this, so I was like, I didn't know what I was looking for, but it was the competition. We were kind of like, okay, we think we're competing with ABM platforms, but then, wow, like a third of our customers also have a traditional ABM platform and us. And then but we're also competing with the status quo or with agencies, like just people doing the work themselves and not, using a platform to do it. And so for us, it was kind of like, oh, okay, that seems to be some signs that, that we might want to head in that direction, but still, it wasn't like the silver bullet. You still didn't know for sure. So
Jason, I think another a thing has changed too in the last maybe 5 years, and with like the introduction of a new category, G2 Crowd, Trust Radius, and these companies that are, it's almost like the peers and communities are now defining when categories should be formed, and you can influence them. But that's really the first indication now that something is happening here. There's lots of energy. There's lots of people providing feedback. Maybe they're splitting apart. So I think that's a good early sign as well.
Sydney, that's such a good point, because I do think that the older world categories were so kind of static and like in some ways archaic, because, and this is no criticism of Gartner, Forrester, whatever, but those businesses, the cycle time to revise things was half a decade. And so Gartner would be writing about something many years after it started being taking off. And I'm blown away by sites like G2 where, something emerges and it's a category like a year later, so that's a really good point.
Yeah. A lot of the younger marketers or just younger professionals wouldn't remember a time where we didn't have G2, right? And so, when you didn't have G2, what did you have? You had the analysts, right? That was really all you had. And like you said, Nick, it just took them they're working on one report at a time. You know what I mean? They've got like 7 reports they're part of. And so it would move really, really slowly.
There had to be enough companies willing to pay them to hire analysts to follow the category. So it was a lagging indicator, not an early indicator.
Old school enterprise, slow moving companies who are the typical client too. So it's not even like their clients are like the cutting edge ones, right? So there's a lot of delay built into that system. And I think even, folks kind of before that don't remember the old era, it's not only like the analysts were the only way to get your message out, but you didn't have all these, the company could be the publisher and the broadcaster. You couldn't have your own podcast or your own TV station on YouTube or your own blog or like all these other things. Like to get your message out there as a company 20 years ago, 25 years ago, it was really, really hard, right? And all of that has changed. So it's not just the G2 Crowd, Trust Radius kind of stuff, but it's also that, your podcast could have a bigger audience than Gartner's, right? And so you could have a bigger megaphone than they do. Yeah. So why do you need them anymore?
Yeah, I love that. Yep.
So well said.
Sounds like the making of Inbound.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So next question, Mike, why don't you get us started on this one? Are there phases to category creation? So like, is there a set number of steps that you go through?
I don't think it's super complicated. A lot of it is just, doing it right and doing it a lot and very in a repetitive way. But I do think you need to start by kind of defining the category. So what it is and also what it isn't. Like, I think most of these categories typically have an enemy or an old way of doing something and then like the new way of doing something. Mm-hmm. So you need to kind of set up that tension of, well, here's the bad way or the old way, here's the good way or the new way. And you need to define that and kind of get yourself and your company and folks on the same page. Then I think a lot of it is just starting to educate people and publish and talk about it. And then I think the next step after that is creating ways and encouraging other folks to start to join the movement and also educate other people. And I felt like, at least at HubSpot, it was one thing for us to kind of, blog a lot about it and have webinars, and I'm out there talking and doing things and publishing stuff and whatever. It felt like it started to become a real movement and a real category when I would find someone else talking about it and saying like, oh, like you need to do inbound marketing and here's the way I think you should do it and things like that. And you're like, oh, like you lost a little bit of control over what the message was and what the movement was. But all of a sudden there's other people, that are spreading it for you and sort of creating those spreaders, whether it could be start as maybe people that are partners and agencies that work with you and things like that. Or, maybe there's some other influencers that you kind of bring, into the fold a little bit. But especially when it ended up being like people that we didn't even know were talking about it, then you're like starting to win and the category is really starting to come together.
Yeah, and Mike, did you guys have a playbook that you were looking at, back then, or like was Play Bigger even out? You know what I mean? Like,
no. I mean, a lot of that stuff has been written since then. I mean, I think that the classic things that are sort of in this area is like positioning by Rees and Trout, right, and like a couple other sort of like classic like marketing texts, sort of like that. But again, those are all written in a different era when it was it was kind of like a different way of thinking, and so or different tools that were available, maybe the same way of thinking strategically. So, we didn't really have necessarily a playbook we were following, which probably led us to making a lot of mistakes along the way. But I think for the core of us, it was something we really believed in. Like all of us felt this like in our bones. This wasn't some BS thing that we created because like, oh, let's build a company. Oh, let's make a category. What's the category going to be? Like, I don't know. This was something that we all sort of independently came to the conclusion that it was happening. I mean, I know in the job I had before HubSpot, running most of marketing at a mid-sized company, I was starting to do all these things just because they were working better and like doing SEO. And we started a corporate blog back in like 2003 and just all this stuff that was kind of like early for that type of thing. But it was all what was working and it was all kind of coming together. And so the final piece of it was giving it a name to what was like sort of already starting to happen kind of on the fringes a little bit.
Nice.
Yeah, I'll double click, Mike, on your answer. Yeah, and get more specific because I 100% agree. It's like first you have your unique point of view. I am a Play Bigger fan. Your unique point of view, and then you're designing kind of those lightning strikes that get you going. But once it starts to become like, I think this is going to happen. There is a process that if you're early and you don't have a experienced AR person on staff, like kind of take some notes here. Because what you want to do is you want to, first of all, make sure that you are talking to the analysts. So it's time to pay up, right? Because they're the ones that's how you play. And so that you're engaged with the right analysts, that you've had multiple conversations with them. I would say up to a year before the category is going to be formed. And push your strat days. So invest in the strategy days and push that as far as close to the boundary that they'll allow before they stop taking calls. Because then you're the last person to talk to them. You get that feedback from them as to how they're thinking about creating the category itself. And then once the survey comes out, you can give feedback. If it doesn't align with how you're thinking about the category, you can push back on the analyst and their researcher and challenge why they're asking questions or how they're rating different things and try and skew it towards the story that you're trying to tell. So don't miss that step because it's really important, because once that's locked in, then you have to answer to whoever's done the best job of helping that analyst define the way that they're going to evaluate the category. And then, you know, once it's out, make sure you're running a proper playbook. You know, they have their rules. I've seen people break those rules, you know, and so toe that line, you know, because, there's no recourse, and they're going to get mad at me for saying that. But, you know, I've been on the other side of that where other people have broken the rules and there's no recourse. So, you know, just be, you know, pay attention to strategic marketing.
Love that. That's awesome. The only thing I'd add in is I think what I've found is the energy of the company evolves over time as you go through these different phases that Mike and Sydney have talked about. In my own head, the way I think about it is there's kind of a why phase, a what phase, a when phase, and a how phase. And you're doing a little bit of all of them all the time, but the why phase is usually like explaining why this category needs to exist. Like, what's the business case for it? So in our world, right? Okay, people are moving to SaaS and subscription. So a lot of the lifetime value of a customer comes after the initial sale. So you got to work on whatever happens after the sale, retention, expansion. So we did a lot of stuff early on like the economics of customer success and all that. Then people start saying, okay, I get that that's important, but what is it? Right. And so that's where you could see us writing all kinds of blog posts about customer success versus customer support, customer success versus account management, like all that, like what is the job? And then you get into what I call the when phase, which is how do I know when it's the time to do it, right? When am I ready for it? When does it make sense if I'm a startup, if I'm a bigger company? And then finally, I think you get to the how phase, which is the most fun, where it's like, okay, I want to go do it. I'm convinced I need to do it and do it now. And I know the high level, what are the best practices? How should I organize? How should I measure my team? Compensation. And that's kind of, you know, if you could look at where customer success is, it's squarely in the how now. And I'm sure, you know, inbound marketing and sales engagement, all now in the how phase. But it's that evolution, at least for our company, that it's been interesting to see, you know, what the market needed at different phases of the journey.
Yeah, and maybe even Nick follow up on, I'm sorry, I was going to say, Nick, follow up on like, how do you stay the leader? Like you were the creator, but how did you stay in the leadership position?
Well, that's a great point because, you know, I always tell our team the first search engine was not Google. So I think maybe Sydney, Mike, and I won't speak for you guys, but I'm old enough to know about Alta Vista, Excite, Lycos, and Yahoo, and the people watching. You can Google those and figure out if those were the search engines before Google. Since most of you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. You're like, who is this boomer talking right now? But like the reality is most category creators are not the category victor. That's just the brutal reality. Like, you know, the pioneers don't always end up being the ones to make the settlement and to like really to win the space. And so I think there's a couple of things that matter. One is building enough of a moat in those early years, right? And so that moat can be some combination of technology. Like we built a pretty robust technology. And then also, obviously, I think, you know, HubSpot did this really well too. And we did a lot around making your content and your thought leadership a moat, right? Like your expertise and all that, right? And so how do you build a moat? And then I would say the other thing is, how do you stay maniacally focused on your customers? Because I think both of you saw, they're the ones that carry you forward. It's a myth to say that the vendors are doing it. It's like the customers, like almost all our customers bring us into their next job or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And then finally, I believe, you know, you always got to respect all the competition that's out there. Not ever be afraid of them or obsessed or anything else, but just realize they're just as smart as you all are. Like, so don't ever fall, you know, prey to the idea that you somehow are the leader and you'll always be the leader. You got to re-earn that every day.
And I think on top of that, it's you talked about that moat, Nick, and I think the moat can be technology, it can be all those things. It also can be like the community that you kind of build around the company. So it can be, you know, agencies or service partners. It can be certifications. You know, as soon as people start hiring someone, you know, I want to hire an inbound marketing manager who has the HubSpot certification, like that's another indication that you want. And that's also something that's, you know, can be part of that overall moat. And I think the final thing is don't be like a one-trick pony. Like you can't use that initial market creation and idea number one for your first product to carry you through whatever stage. You need to add a lot of products after that and drive more and more innovation. Sometimes that can spread you beyond kind of that initial category creation. But that's okay, because unless you're launching new product after new product after new product and adding to that base, you're just never going to be the big winner in the end game.
I think that's a good point too, Mike, because we debated that at SalesLoft. Like, do we start creating a net new category? And there were other people that were jumping on a net new category because our category had been defined. Sales engagement was big enough. There were enough players, like, and this new tangential revenue, it was ROI, like revenue operations. I can't remember what it was. I've been gone, only 8 months, but, it's like, okay, so are we jumping to a new category? Do we stay focused on the category we have? Do we try and shift it? And so I think, when you're looking at markets and what's happening in the markets and how the categories are defining those and intersecting, you have to make that choice. There was one point at Adobe that the product set that I was representing was in 14 different categories. It was a massive platform. And it was like, there was no way we were going to be number one in every single one. And so we had to say, which ones do we lead and land with? And those are the ones that we want to stay leaders in. And then, we're okay being a challenger in some of the tangential categories because the investment that it would take to be leader is too high, or, so when you get in really big companies, that starts to be a game you start to play. But, when is the time to like even branch out into a new category?
And you may shift from being a category creator to not being a category creator anymore. I mean, that's what's happened in HubSpot, right? The whole inbound marketing category launched the company, got it to hundreds of millions of ARR, and seeded the base to then be able to sell these other products. But, there was HubSpot's CRM is not a category creation product, nor the products for sales reps, nor the customer service product, right? And those things are all huge, huge portions of revenue. And now it's just, they're a giant software company that has customers that love them, that, serves mid-market and SMB like really well, and has probably some advantages in terms of go-to-market. Some of those things I think are still true, but it's not like there's a new category necessarily being created today, right? And that's okay. Like at a certain point, once you get to very big scale, the game kind of changes again.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Mike, because I think category creation is more of a market entry strategy than it is a long-term strategy. Eventually, if you want to go after a big market, most of the big markets exist already. Like you said, customer service, sales, SFA.
Back to your point, so it's a way to really, really big SaaS companies. It's like, well, those are the really, really big markets, right?
Exactly. But it's a good way to get in the door, right? Which is why folks are probably watching.
That's awesome. Cool.
Sorry, Jason, we just took over.
No, this is great. This is exactly, I'm like, I don't need enough to moderate. All right, see you guys. Sweet. Yeah, this is going all by itself. Let me ask, we'll wrap up with one final question. Just a quick answer on this one. Try and give me a range of costs that you think, that you think you spent to really, on the side, create the category. So like just a range is good. And I know this isn't, don't get your calculators out, everybody watching, but like, what do you think, like if you had to put a number behind it, what do you think that would be? Nick, why don't you start us?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I hate to do a cop-out answer, but the two like high-level things. One is it's much more time than money. Like I put so much personal time into this. I'm sure Mike's and all your colleagues. And speaking, thinking, writing, like I've written myself probably 1,000 blog posts and 2 books, and so time is the biggest thing. The second thing is I think your whole company is doing it, so it's a little bit harder to measure. But if I had to say like the incremental cost, it's probably like on the order of a few $1 million, depending on the scale of your ambitions, of course. It's not 100 million. It's not some crazy amount, but it actually requires a lot of patience because you put that money in and it can take a while, it can take a while for everything to come together.
Yeah.
I'll tag onto that. So I think the year that we knew the category was going to get formed. It was one of our top 3 initiatives at SalesLoft. And so we're like, be the leader. That was the mantra. And so, at that point you want to have a dedicated AR person. You're going to, have those licenses with those different vendors, which can range 100 to 150 per vendor, per category that you're in. Especially if you're doing the strat days, if you're going to launch at an event, that's probably where Nick's Millions is coming in. Yeah. And so the insight here, and it goes back to the first question you asked, Jason, is like, is it the best to be the category creator? Because you're going to make the investment on the broader category that other people are going to draft on. So that $1 million, guess what? The other folks that come in after you aren't spending the same amount to participate and play in that category. So that's why it's a strategic question that you have to ask yourself, and at what time do you go into that? Because the beauty is, and both Nick and Mike did this very well. When you're creating a category, you get to talk about something that's bigger than yourself. You're not out there representing HubSpot or Gainsight. You're out there representing the category. And so you can talk about things that you don't yet do, even. And as you're setting that vision and you're drawing that larger audience into this movement that they can become a part of, for which, you know, you're one of the best offerings that's out there. But so timing is everything. I mean, it's a really strategic question to ask yourself and your teams, like, because it is a huge, huge investment. It was a third plus of our effort that year in going after the category, through multiple players.
The thing I would add to all of that is that it should be 100% of your time and effort and dollars. So if you really want to create the category, the founder does not have a conversation with anyone without mentioning the category and why it's important and setting it up. Like, you don't, it's not this like side thing where you have like, oh, we have our investor deck that's like the secret plan of the company. And then, we talk to other people about why this is this thing on the side. It's like, no, it's like they are the same. Our sales calls used to start with like, oh, I'm so happy to talk to you today. What have you heard about inbound marketing? Or something like that, right? And that's on the sales side. Customer success, same thing. Okay, we're going to set up your inbound marketing plan. Here are the steps, right? All of our content, like everything we talked about, it was so, when you say like how much money was for, it was like all of the money was for demand generation and content creation, like at the same time. And I think there was not much that we did that was only category creation. It was like they were both at the same time. It's like, we're going to have a webinar and we're going to generate leads and we're going to call those people and try to sell them something. But the webinar is about inbound marketing or some part of inbound marketing or something like that. So I think it works best when there's no separation. Like they are one and the same thing.
I love that. Yeah. If I summarized it from my perspective, the cost is that you just can't just be transactional. Like what you're talking about, Mike. You're doing webinars to educate the world on something new, and you know it's going to eventually come back to you. But the cost is you're not being as transactional as a traditional vendor. Like it's not like click here and buy now.
You're probably adding a little bit. You're probably adding a little bit, like an extra step or something in the funnel is maybe the way to think about it. And actually, we had data to support that. Like at HubSpot in the early years, we had built up a lot of following. And, our conversion rates weren't as good as you kind of went through the funnel. And so we did some surveys of people on the site and said like, hey, quick thing, like, what does HubSpot do? And the most popular answer was either marketing content site or like some sort of marketing agency. Like software company was like third or fourth on the list, right? Yeah. And then at that point we had like millions of followers, millions of blog visits. So we said, okay, we can now shift a little bit more and talk a little bit more about our products and have kind of side things. And in an article about inbound marketing, you have a thing on the side about like, oh, we have software that helps you do this, and here's why it's cool. Like go over here, kind of thing. And we started to do that, and then we saw those numbers change within like 2 quarters. So I do think building the big audience first is right. But you're right, Nick. We definitely had. You can see that you build this much, much bigger audience and people love you, but they don't know like what you do necessarily as much as if you're only marketing your product. That's
interesting.
I love that.
Well, I hate to wrap this up, y'all, but this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate it. I could talk to you guys about this all day long and keep learning stuff, but I'm sure this was very valuable for everybody else. Sydney, Nick, Mike, thanks again for doing this with us, and have a great day, everybody.